Arizona Capital Times Meet the Candidates. My name is Luige del Puerto, and I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. I will be moderating tonight's meet and greet. We would have loved to have met with everybody in person. However, we want to keep the candidates, you, the voters, and our staffers safe from COVID-19. Tonight is the fourth of a series of Meet the Candidates virtual events, and we will do the same thing tomorrow, and tomorrow is going to be our final one. At this point, I want to thank the Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission for sponsoring this series. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission administers the Citizens Clean Elections Act, which voters passed in 1998. The act seeks to restore citizen participation and confidence in the political system, improve the integrity of the Arizona state government, and promote freedom of speech under the U.S. and Arizona constitutions. To tell us more, please welcome Gina Roberts, the Voter Education Director of the Citizens Clean Elections Commission. Gina?
Hello, Luigi, and thank you for that. And good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight to learn more about the candidates that are running in your district. Thank you to the Arizona Capital Times for bringing us all together. It's a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about what each candidate stands for. The reason why Clean Elections sponsored this event was because our mission is to help voters participate in the political process. And again, what better way than to tune in from home and get to see those candidates and hear a little bit more about them. It's very timely because many of you may already have your ballots in your hands right now. Early voting began July 8th. I have my ballot right here. And so we hope that this series tonight, as well as many of the other tools provided by Clean Elections, such as our voter education guide, which should have been in your mailbox already, and hopefully you have received that. We have our debates, which are moderated by the Arizona Capital Times as well. And the tools and resources that we have on our website, we hope all of these items help you as a voter cast an informed ballot. After tonight, if you'd like to learn more about the candidates, such as their websites and their social media links, profiles, their biographies, and of course, more information about the primary election itself, which is on August 4th, please visit our website at azcleanelections.gov. Thank you again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy meeting your candidates.
Thank you, Gina. A few housekeeping notes. First, please note that this is not a debate. Candidates are here to tell you about their campaigns and perhaps try and persuade you to vote for them. It's also an opportunity for you to send in your questions and ask the candidates. And you can do that by submitting your questions via the link, which you will see, which you can find in the YouTube description, right underneath your YouTube screen. We will try to get to as many questions as we can tonight. And also, we will be bringing the candidates in by batch. And that means after every batch of candidates, we will take a very short break, and then we will come back online. And finally, if you could subscribe and like the YouTube channel that you're watching, that's the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop channel. That's great for us, and we would love to get you to subscribe to more of our events. And so joining us tonight will be candidates from Legislative District 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and Legislative District 24. At this point, we're going to take a very short break. We're going to get the candidates in the room, and then we will begin the meet and greet. And so stay tuned. We will be right back. welcome back to Meet the Candidates. And with us tonight, our first batch, are candidates from Legislative District 19, Representative Lorenzo Sierra and Lisa Sun. I think I'm going to start by asking you both, why you're running, or in the case of Representative Sierra, why you're seeking re-election. In fact, let me start with Lisa. Ma'am, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lisa Sun, and I am running for the State House of Representatives for our beloved district, LD 19. I am a stay-at-home mom, and I've been raising a gifted child for the last 14 years. And being in LD 19 since his birth, it really brought me home. This is the only home that my son knows. And as he grew and went into public school, unfortunately, we encountered a lot of missteps with the schools that he was enrolled in. And we came across finding out public schools are actually divided between charters and district. And once we differentiate the differences and did a little bit more research, we realized that we are not being represented as a community. And what is happening currently in our district is most of the constituents are unaware of the differentiations. So I feel that being a woman, a homemaker, understanding firsthand being an immigrant, it would be the best step to run for public office, because I think it's time to have something a little bit different, something that encompasses our entire community. And being here in the last 14, 15 years, I have been in a position of being misrepresented with my ethnicity, with my race, with my gender. And that's not just me, So I like to run for public office, do my patriotic duty, and give my best shot. And I look forward to this primary next month.
Thank you, Lisa. Representative Sierra, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Luigi, and thank you to everyone watching out here. I'm running for re-election because it's all about community to me. I've been in this community for 10 years, and I am just so pleased and so honored to serve the people of Legislative District 19. And whether it's bringing in 45,000 books, free brand new books to our school children, or whether it's fighting for and getting COVID-19 testing out here, and during this global pandemic, making sure that people have food, that they're being well represented, that we're trying to get people their unemployment benefits, everything that's going along with things that we never planned would happen, but we're stepping up and we are trying to piecemeal and trying to make up for a bad state approach, for a bad federal approach to this pandemic. And we're doing the best that we can. And I'm glad to work with people like Mayor Anna Tovar and Mayor Kate Gallego and Mayor Ken Weiss here in Avondale to make sure that we do have that testing and that we are getting through this pandemic as best that we can. And that, I want to keep continuing to serve this community. Last year alone in 2019, in a non-election year, I was able to attend more than 400 community events. And that includes going to schools, breakfasts, lunches, dinner, and often triple and quadruple booked from time to time. I love the school visits and getting to meet thousands of people every day, or throughout the year, and getting to know their hopes and dreams and serving them the best we can. And Luigi, that's on top of my legislative calendar, which is quite extensive as well. So I want to keep serving you, the people of Legislative District 19, and I hope I've earned your trust and your vote. Thank you.
Thank you both. So, one of the most asked questions that we have gotten has to deal with how the governor is handling this pandemic. So, the governor held a press conference this afternoon in which, among other things, he has extended the moratorium on evictions to October. A couple of days ago, he required restaurants to only open up to 50% of their capacity. And if you're going to go dine in at a restaurant, you're required to wear a mask. In addition, he has seized the operations of a couple of businesses, gyms, bars, tubing in the Salt River. Lisa, what are your thoughts on how the governor has handled this pandemic so far? And I guess more specifically with the extension of the moratorium on evictions. Do you agree with this move?
So recently, my dad, he lives in Taiwan, and he's been watching the news overseas, and he's been texting me more frequently because of the news that he sees overseas about Arizona being the hot spot. And, he asked, why is the governor not being more proactive and being aligned with the CDC guidelines and so forth? And, my only answer that I have for him is that it's just based on politics. Once Trump showed up, he was given that pressure. And what's really disappointing to see is the effort that we put in the beginning was all for nothing when we allow the reopening so early without the CDC guideline of having the flattening of the curve to decrease with a minimum, I believe, 2 weeks or so. And that did not happen. In fact, I think we were going uphill when Trump had the visit and pressured our governor to reopen. So in that aspect, that was a poorly judgment on our governor.
What do you make? What do you make of the governor's latest actions? For example,
right, the moratorium for the evictions.
Right, extending that moratorium.
Right, because the issue of that relates to all the effort that was done in the beginning is all of a waste. We weren't proactive enough to even consider the possibility of these landlords to have a minimum of one property, which they themselves are also rely on their income on. So the moratorium is great to implement to safe haven those that won't have shelter and be exposed to the COVID-19 virus. But at the same time, there are other venues where they could have reinforced resources and funds to help those unable to cover the lease agreements with the landlord and the renters at the lower level. Because when you talk about property owners and investors, I mean, I'm not worried about those levels. I'm talking about the little people, in our community that are like single homes, renting out their homes as an income. So in that aspect to, extend the moratorium, I agree with, but I think we should also focus on a certain area of it where we can circumvent the funding and assistance through various programs that's already in place.
Thank you. Representative Sierra, the same question, sir. Well, I guess the same sets of questions, right?
Yeah.
Same set of questions, yeah.
I would be remiss, Luigi, if I didn't mention that COVID has hit really hard and hit really close to home to my family personally. We lost a dear friend, and I would just say blessings to you, Father John. May you rest in peace. And we are minutes, hours away from hearing about another family member who's about to pass.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that.
But thank you very much. So it has hit my family. It's hit many families. And I would take one step back from the governor, and I would look at the failed response before the pandemic was even determined to be a pandemic. When in 2019, the Trump administration disbanded the pandemic team. And I've read the document that sort of was the playbook for pandemics. Once he did that, and then he dismantled the Asian team that was looking into the virus at the time. So he underestimated sort of what was going on overseas, took people's word for it, was bamboozled, was slow to react, which then caused governors who are beholden to him to also act slower and not get ahead of the president. So what we had was a failed response, and from the get-go, and we've never had a comprehensive strategic federal approach, and we should be just implementing here at the state level. We've been given $28 billion from the HEROES Act. And that's been supposed to go to things like the rental assistance, whether it's the PPP, and we've not used that as well as we could. And it's not been until the recent past that we finally got the good amount of testing over here in the West Valley. Luigi, I remember that we had to work with a nonprofit to bring it here for our meat packing plant people and for our essential workers.
Yep.
And I've been making the economic case. Legislative District 19 is the supply chain hub of the southwestern United States. All of your well-known brands move through here.
Yeah.
And when you look at how many essential workers we have, if we have a significant uptick in our
Representative Sierra, if you can wrap it up. I do want to get two more questions. Go ahead, sir. Yeah, just real quick.
Yeah, but and if we have a disruption in the supply chain, our economy is going to crash in an even more significant way. And so that's why I've been fighting with my seatmates to bring all the resources that we can here.
Thank you. There had been Black Lives Matter protests in the last several weeks. Some of those protesters believe that the police should be defunded, and some of them believe that when you say defunded, there are two thoughts, right? One is to divert some of the funding for the police into maybe social services. And the other thought is to completely defund the police, effectively abolish the police. I want to ask you if you support, defunding the police in that sense. Lisa?
Right. Defunding doesn't necessarily mean to the complete removal and dismantle of our enforcement department. In my perspective, and some ideas that I like to throw out, is to reallocate. And the reallocation may require additional funding, such as PTSD. These individuals, officers that are frontline in our community and protecting us, need to be retrained. Retraining costs money. They also need to reassess the training in the way that, do we go out the way it is, the status quo, or should we go more towards the policing of community, where officers are assigned within a community on a day-to-day basis and to interact with the communities, to understand that particular district or community, and then to bring back to the precinct and share best practices. That implementation has actually worked at New Jersey and Compton, and it's just something that I would like to throw around. And if that can something be pulled through, I think as lawmakers, we should, support that. It should be a bipartisan issue. So defunding for me is reallocation and trying something that has been tested to result in something far more positive and really stick to the core message of our law enforcement, that is protect and serve our community.
Thank you, Lisa. And Representative Shira, the same question, sir. Do you support abolishing the police, defunding the police?
I absolutely don't abolish. I support abolishing the police force. Luigi, when I was a city councilman in the city of Avondale, I had direct responsibility over the livelihoods and the lives of the men and women of our police force. And one of the things that we made sure that we did as a council and as a city is that we developed a police force that represented the community, that looked like the community, and that was part of the community. Some of the neighborhood groups that I often helped out, I would bring the police there for the first time in a non-confrontational sense, so that we could start building those community bridges between the police force and the communities where it may have been a adversarial relationship in the past. I am very much an advocate of communities developing its own police forces, meaning that we start recruiting from maybe even junior high on and create a JTED program to where we can get members of the community policing the community, so that we have that institutional trust that we may not have in other places. So I'm really proud of what we've done here in the Southwest Valley with our police forces. And yes, I think there needs to be an allocation. I think some instances where there is police intervention probably needs a social worker or some sort of service worker that can handle that case. Mental health professionals.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of reshuffling of the funds and allocation the resources that we can do. And I think the more you can do it in a community-based manner with people having a say in that, I think that's going to go a long way to building that trust that we need, at least in the community.
Thank you. So we are pretty much out of time. I do want to ask you, and if you can just give me a yes or no answer, recreational marijuana, it's going to be on the ballot this November, or likely will be on the ballot this November. Representative Scheer, are you going to support? Are you going to vote for it?
I'll vote yes.
And Lisa?
Absolutely. Autism, yes.
And with that, I want to thank you again for being so patient, for spending your time, with us this evening. Please enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Candidates, and we have with us candidates from Legislative District 20, Judy Schwiebert and Doug Irvin. I guess I'll start off by asking you, why you're running, and if you've modified the way you're campaigning as a result of COVID-19. I think I'm going to start with Doug.
Well, thank you very much, Luigi, and for Clean Elections for having us tonight. This is a great event. Why I'm running, I'm an accountant by trade and a volunteer tutor for second graders. So I'm very passionate about education in Arizona. And that includes pre-K, because as a tutor for second graders, you see how important that is, K through 12, community colleges, trade schools, and universities. And I know everybody talks about we need funding for that, and that's important. And we also need to make sure teachers can teach again. But I can use my accounting background, my experience in taxes, to making sure that we can get the funds there without putting the burden on working families. Because I moved here when I was 3. This is after my dad left the Air Force. I was actually born on a military base, raised in a military family, and they taught me the importance of integrity and working in the community. So as I went to school, I had to put myself through night school, became an accountant, passed the CPA exam, was a controller for a small business, a corporate tax auditor, but then ended up designing financial systems. I spent a couple decades doing that, where we actually had a little small company, software company locally, and I helped grow it. So when I left a few years ago, we had about 750 employees internationally. But that's when I really want to spend my time focusing on the community. So I volunteered a lot with schools, environmental projects, and that took me down to the legislature to talk to them and say, hey, what's going on here? And then that's where I saw firsthand and really dig into tax policy and saw all the money that's being wasted in giveaways, because day one in tax policy, you learn broad-based low rates. And that's not been our Arizona approach. So that's the fiscal responsibility I want to bring back. So I hope we can talk about some more of that. I know people love to talk about tax policy, and that's why people will tune in. So hopefully we can talk more about that and answer questions.
I do love talking about tax policy. That's one of the things I sort of specialized when I was a reporter. And I'm going to ask you one or two questions about tax policy. Judy, go ahead,
Wonderful.
ma'am. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running.
Of course. Well, again, thank you so much for having me, and to you and Clean Elections, and thank you also for everybody who's watching. So my family moved to Arizona when I was just 6 years old, and so I grew up in Arizona, and I've spent all my adult life in the LD20 district. It's where I raised my two now adult sons. It's where I taught at Greenway and Cactus High Schools for 27 years. And I have also been a community leader. I'm a co-founder of TheaterWorks and was on the board for some time, and have been an event organizer and a director of a wellness center at my church. And I never imagined that I would actually be running for office. But I have to say that as a mom and a teacher, it just breaks my heart that we had students in over 1,800 classrooms last year who had no permanent qualified teacher. And that's because the Arizona legislature continues to strangle our schools. We're 49th in the nation in how well we or how poorly we fund our schools. So we're failing our children and our economy. I have had business leaders and friends in the district talking to me about how they are desperate for a strong, educated workforce. And for that, we need to prioritize investments in our schools and in well-trained and qualified teachers. You know, my campaign slogan is that I know we all do better when we listen and work together so every student can get a quality education, the quality education they deserve, and everybody gets their chance to thrive. And I know that an educated and healthy workforce is a foundation for a strong economy and good paying jobs. So that's why I'm running.
Thank you, Judy. So the governor this afternoon extended the executive order halting eviction. So it's a moratorium on evictions that's supposed to expire, next week, and he has extended that to October. In addition, the governor has, as you know, shut down the operations of gyms and bars, tubing in the Salt River. If you're a restaurant owner, you can only open up to 50% of your space, of your capacity. And if you're going to go dine in any of our restaurants, you have to wear a mask. Judy, what are your thoughts on how the governor has handled this pandemic so far? And more specifically, do you support requiring the restaurants to only open up to 50% of their capacity?
Okay. Well, let me back up from that a little bit and just say this virus is serious. I think the numbers today on the Arizona Department of Health website says 2,492 people have died in Arizona. So we need to take that seriously. And at the same time, my local business people here are really hurting, and we have to get our economy going. But I'm concerned that we're not doing that in a way that's going to lead, we're doing it in a way that's going to lead us right back to a spike in cases like the ones that we have experienced since Memorial Day, and we'll wind up shut down again. So I think that this 50% capacity thing that the governor has imposed is probably a stopgap measure, but it avoids the real issue of making sure that we know where the areas of infection are. You know, we're fighting an invisible threat to our health and economy.
Just a quick follow-up on that one, ma'am. When you say that you would like to know where the infections are, you want to see, for example, if this senior facility is having the infections, you want to see data about that. If you want to see, like, for example, a section of a city that has, is that the kind of data that you're looking for? So basically you could avoid those places?
No, I'm looking for contact tracing data. And right now that's really difficult because for the most part, we've got Sonora Quest doing all the testing, and it's an 8 to 10 day turnaround to even know if somebody is infected. So we need to reach benchmarks like knowing how many people are infected and where the infections are coming from, which is what the contact tracing will help provide for us. And then we can start to open up the broader economy a little bit wider. But
Thanks. Yeah.
I feel like we're doing our part as citizens, but our leaders need to do their part by making sure this infrastructure is in place.
Thank you. Doug, the same question to you, sir. What are your thoughts about how the governor has handled this pandemic so far? And more specifically, I guess, with allowing the restaurants to only open up to 50% of their capacity?
Sure. I mean, I think early on, he did well with what we didn't, people were still trying to figure it out very quickly. We were a little later than other states to shut down, but I think people understood the sacrifices that are being made. But then even as in the charts he showed today, after the reopening things, the spike came very quickly thereafter in June. I think we needed to see those metrics in place right at that time and communicate better to people that said, this is what we are needing to do. We all have to be rowing together to get where we need to be. We all want our kids back in school. We all want the economy going again. We all want to be able to go back out and to eat. But we need to get to certain places to do that safely. And so the 50% is great, but we also need to be better out helping out the small businesses and restaurants and saying, these are the steps you really need to take. I've talked to leveraged small businesses and they said, look, we're not getting the guidance we need directly from the state. So they're reaching out to other organizations who are finding things from other states like Michigan and Colorado and bringing that information here and saying, hey, this is what you can do. Because that's what we really need to communicate to people. It said, look, if you wear a mask, this is how it's going to help. If you make these sacrifices now, this is where we're going. And get that communication and then lead by example. It shouldn't have taken so long for the governor and other leaders to actually wear a mask. This is not a new thing. But unfortunately, we have other leaders who still refuse. They're just blatant disregard, and that's not how we're going to get there.
Just a quick follow-up question on that one. At this point, if you had the authority, would you shut down completely restaurants? Would you completely, and perhaps other businesses that you deem to be non-essential?
No, I would not personally shut down other restaurants, but I would make sure that people knew what restaurants are taking them seriously. Because I go around to restaurants as an accountant, I want to make sure these small businesses survive.
And where do you reckon that information is going to come from? From the state? Like which restaurant are, you understand what I'm trying to get at is that, if you want information about whether a restaurant is complying with the requirements, you're supposed to get that information from the state or from the restaurant or where exactly?
Well, both. Then also from the public that's saying, here's businesses that are taking it seriously. We see that advertised now. If I'm a business, I'm taking it seriously. I go in there. I have to tell you, after May, my wife and I wanted to go eat. We went out and we saw none of the staff was wearing masks. We said, we're not going to eat here. We went down and saw a restaurant that was taking it more seriously. So I think those can go out there. The state can list those and say, these are what they've seen, kind of like a health inspection, but to a much bigger, broader case.
I'm sorry. So I just want to do a quick follow-up. You would have liked to see the state list the restaurants that are complying and list the restaurants that are not complying as well?
Well, some way to communicate that. If the state is the metric or the state is the houser of that information, that would be great. Or it can be more of a, for lack of a better term, a Yelp type of review. So people are able to see who's really taking it seriously, who's working together to help out the community from there. That goes with the contact tracing, that goes with the testing we need, all these things working together so that we can know who's taking it seriously and do those things.
Thank you. Judy, let me ask you about a tax question. There is a proposal in the state legislature, or was a proposal in the state legislature to hike the gas tax. That's a tax that hasn't been increased for decades. The funding revenue from that will help with road funding. Would you support it if you get elected into the legislature next year and it's introduced? Are you a yes on that proposal?
Well, while I appreciate the interest in creating much needed revenue, no, I do not believe we should be increasing taxes on working families. They're the ones that would be hardest hit by this kind of a tax on gas. I would like to make sure that we're first prioritizing that the gas tax that we already have is used for its intended purpose. So often the governor or legislators have swept that money to use it for other purposes than the ones that's intended for, to maintain our roads and bridges and infrastructure.
Doug, same question, sir. If you were elected to the legislature, this gas tax proposal is before you. Are you a yes or a no?
Yeah, I would like to make sure we're addressing a lot of other taxes first. So making sure we're rolling back the sales tax exemption on purchase of airplanes, on certain people buying fine arts, on the 4-inch pipe. There's a long lineage of that. So once we can go through those, because those all need the same supermajority that we would need to pass the gas tax. Once we get there, if we still don't have the revenue for whatever reason, then I would look at that. But I want to make sure we do the other things first, broaden that base, so we're not putting the burden on working families. We're rolling back those irresponsible ones, exemptions and credits that have been given out for years, and then just sit there with nobody looking at them and seeing if they're profitable.
So you
Then,
would be,
if we had to,
you would be a no on a gas tax proposal before you, unless you have rolled back some of those other taxes.
exactly.
So let me shift to recreational marijuana. That it's likely going to be on the ballot as well this November. Judy, are you going to be a yes on that proposal?
Up until a few years ago, I probably would have been a no. But I've done some considerable research and given it a lot of thought. And I just believe that legalizing marijuana would actually allow us to increase the oversight of it and make sure it's being used safely and make sure it's not in the hands of children and young people. But I don't think that we can prevent the use of marijuana by throwing people in jail, which is what we're doing right now. And we can see how costly that has been to our state. Arizona has more people in prison per capita than any other state in the country, and more people in prison per capita than many other countries, including Russia. So we need to really reduce the rapidly escalating costs of having a small personal amount of marijuana and having that, have you wind up in jail. It's a huge cost to our state, and it's a huge cost to those families who are impacted by having somebody in their family incarcerated.
So you would be a yes to it?
Yes.
Doug, same question, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I really wish this is a very big and complicated issue that the legislature had done their job and addressed this themselves. But like so many other things, the voter had to go out and do it themselves, so it's going to go through the initiative. Like Judy a few years ago, my gut reaction was no. But then I went through, and instead of just finding stats that would support my gut reaction, I went and looked at it. And one of the things, I went and talked to young people, and I said, look, if I gave you an hour, could you go get a joint? And almost all of them said, yeah, if I spent 57 minutes on my phone first, because it's that easy to get. And I said, but what potency is it? What kind of strain? Where was this made? What good? I don't know, just some guy. Well, it reminded me of, back in the Prohibition days, you're just getting something out of a still. That's not safe. And then I thought about the people who want to do this at home responsibly. That should be fine for them to do it. Definitely, it's like alcohol and other kind of drugs. You can't have people driving impaired. You can't have them work impaired, any of those types of things. That falls under the same thing. So from what I've read of this current initiative, it looks like it's done better at putting those, clearing that up, that says, employers cannot, employers still can say it's a drug-free environment, and making sure all the safeties that are there for it. So at this point, yes, based on the initiative that I see, I'm a yes.
And with that, we are out of time. Doug and Judy, thank you so much for being so patient. Thank you for spending the evening with us. Enjoy the rest of the night, and I guess I'll see you around.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Luigi. Thank you, everyone.
And to our viewers and listeners, we are going to bring in the next batch of candidates. And so we're going to take a very short break, and we will be right back. welcome back to Meet the Candidates. My name is Luigi del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. And with us tonight is Kathy Connect, who's running in Legislative District 21. I think I'm going to ask you, Kathy, why you're running. I think you've run a few times, if I'm not mistaken. And tell us a little bit about yourself and and why you're running.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Luigi. I have run a few campaigns. I was elected 3 times to my local school board, and that was a fabulous experience. And I ran in 2018 as an independent for the Arizona State Senate, and now I'm running for the Arizona House.
As a Democrat, correct?
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about your transition from independent to Democrat.
Oh, well, one thing that we learned, despite the fact that we worked really, really hard and ended up with 48% of the vote, it's hard to win as an independent. You don't get a lot of attention from the media. We certainly didn't until very near the end. The system is made by the parties. And so I wasn't going to run again, but I realized that my community still had the same needs and that I had the skills to bring to the table to represent my community. And so I decided I would run as a Democrat, and it gives me more of an infrastructure, more of a base of people to help me out. And I'm really very pleased to be bringing people from all parties along with me to this new campaign, people who know who I am and know what I stand for.
So the governor this afternoon held a press conference. One of the things that sort of stood out for me was the way he characterized the various voices with respect to this pandemic. He said that there's the shut everything down lobby, and there's the government shouldn't mandate me lobby. And I wonder, with sort of this two polar, these opposites that he has sort of laid out, where would you place yourself on that spectrum?
Well, certainly I try very hard to be a uniter of people and resist this reflexive urge that we seem to have in this nation and in the state right now to immediately take sides with one another. As far as this conflict between wearing masks or not wearing masks or opening up or not, I don't think healthcare is something that should be partisan. I don't think it's something that we should be taking sides on. We all have to live among each other, of course. The conversation seems to be between, personal liberty and personal responsibility. And I don't think that those two are mutually exclusive. I certainly think that we all have the ability to look out for our friends and our neighbors and do whatever that takes. If it's putting on a mask, if it's staying, then we should be doing those things for each other. And what we saw is when our community was breaking down and not doing those things for one another, that the government had to step in and make take some further steps to ensure that we're getting healthy. Because we all want our kids to be able to go to school. We want to be able to open up our businesses. And I think there's growing understanding that until we get a handle on the virus, it's not going to happen.
Some have called for completely shutting down restaurants, for example. The governor has said, let's allow the restaurants to continue operating, but at 50% capacity. Of course, gyms and bars, tubing in the Salt River, those operations have ceased. I wonder if you agree with, some of the calls, some from your party, to kind of shut, what they deem to be non-essential businesses.
Well, we have to listen to the experts and watch the data day by day. I would say right now, in the last couple of days, we seem to have seen a slowing in the surge, which is good. And I'm a very optimistic and hopeful person, and helpful too. And I would certainly hope that if people continue to do the things that we're being asked to do, wear a mask in public, that we'd start to see those numbers come down. And when we see those numbers come down, I think schools are going to be able to open and some of these restrictions are going to be opening up. But setting a date, I don't think is as effective as looking at specific benchmarks, at specific measurements that we can take. When we know that a certain amount of people are being tested, and that the turnaround is within a reasonable time that we can take action in contact tracing, and that the percentage of those positives are coming down. When we can meet those benchmarks and the experts are saying that it's safe, then we can start opening up.
So just to go back to the question, if you were in charge, for example, if you had the authority, at this point tonight, would you have shuttered the operations of restaurants, for example, completely?
If my decision was tonight, I would say, let's see if this stasis holds and if we can start seeing a decline if people are changing their behavior.
We are seeing a little bit of we are seeing some declines, right? It's the data is just a couple of days old, but we are certainly seeing some of the plateauing, if you will, of all of these things, all points that we're tracing. And so again, to go back to the question, at this point, would you shut down the restaurants operations completely, or would you allow them to operate at right now at 50% capacity?
I wouldn't shut them down anymore today. No, I would not.
If you had one of the questions that we've been asked is if you had a school age child, and I think that we're looking at August 17, and the governor said this afternoon that he's talking to school leaders, so that date might in fact change depending on his conversation with school leaders, right? So would you be comfortable in sending your kid, if you had a school age child, and I don't know if you have a school age child, niece, nephew, back to school physically?
No, and my girls are in their 20s now. No, I would not be comfortable now, and not just for the well-being of my own children, but I think that there's a lot of reasons why sending kids back to school right now doesn't make a lot of sense. For one, we know that social distancing is part of the path forward on lowering the number of infections. And so that means that we would have to put 6, maybe 10 kids in a classroom so that they were distanced. We know that one of the biggest problems in Arizona right now, in terms of education, is that we don't have enough certified teachers to teach the kids. And so if we were splitting existing classrooms into thirds or into fourths, we would not have the capacity to have an instruction. And then the other reason is if we know that our numbers are very high right now, over 3,000 cases a day. And so, and we can be hopeful that they come back down. While those numbers are there, if it's raging outside of our classrooms, it will be raging inside our classrooms too. And putting that number of people together for 8 hours a day, we know that the amount of time that people spend together is another factor. I believe, and I am not a medical expert, but I certainly do heed the advice of medical experts. It would be a way to increase the number of infections.
Thank you. So we don't know what the budget situation is going to be like in fiscal year 2021, next year, when the legislature has to draft a budget for the state. We are hoping that if we're going to have a rebound, it's going to be a pretty big rebound, and we don't have to face a couple $100 million in deficit. If you're elected to the legislature and you find yourself in that situation when you're staring down hundreds of millions of dollars in a deficit, and you had to cut something, right? You have to make a budget cuts. Which program, which spending would you cut?
Oh, that would not be my first attempt at anything. I would be looking for ways to increase revenue by looking at the ways that we've promised a return on investment on some tax incentives that we said, oh, if we give this tax break to XYZ, then we're going to get a lot of money back. Well, you know what? We are not in the habit of going back and looking at those things to see if they are in fact having the return on investment. I would argue if those tax breaks and tax cuts were having the return on investment, we wouldn't have the revenue problem that we do now. But I think if you're, and I know you, Luigi, you're gonna press me for an answer, or where would I cut? I think Arizona spends, and exorbitant amount of money on our correction system. And I think that, if you have to ask whether you get a better investment on educating kids or putting people in prison, I think kids win every single time. And so if I had to make cuts, I would look at ways to spend less money on our corrections.
There are a couple ballot proposals that likely will be on the ballots this November. One of them is the proposal to legalize recreational marijuana. What are your thoughts? Are you a yes or no?
I'm a child of the 70s, and so I had lots of anti-drug education as a kid. And so I don't come to this decision easily. But I've looked at, the way the medical marijuana industry has taken hold in Arizona. And so I'm a little less leery than I used to be. And I would vote yes. And here's why. Because right now, recreational marijuana is it's illegal. And when you have an illegal substance for sale, it causes a black market and criminal activity around that. And so I think if we legalize it, it allows us to do several things. It allows us to regulate and make sure that the criminal element is not as pervasive in that. It allows us to make sure that it's not being marketed and advertised to young people. It allows us to collect revenue there and put it back into education. And so for those reasons, I would vote yes.
Here's one question. Do you support the idea of medically assisting people who are terminally ill and only have a few months to live to die?
Oh, I really haven't given that any thought. I know that what we do need to do is make sure that people have access to affordable health care so that the quality of their lives long into their age is good.
But on this specific question, you haven't formed an opinion on it.
Not really, no.
My
mom is healthy, and so no, really haven't given that much thought.
So here's another question. Nonprofit organizations are struggling in Arizona like never before because businesses have been closed and a lot of people are out of work. Besides giving nonprofits more government funding, what would you do to help them?
So I happen to be the chairman of a nonprofit right now, chairman of the board, and I've been on many nonprofits.
How's your nonprofit doing, by the way? And how's the revenue situation for your organization?
So we were fortunate to be awarded the PPP, and we have applied for the EIDL, and we're an arts organization, so we're having to do everything differently. For example, we're doing our exhibits online, and we're doing everything virtually, whether it's art lessons or whatever. So what would I say? I would say that nonprofits need to help each other. This is the time when nonprofits can partner with one another. Sometimes they can share staff during this time, especially when things might be a little slower. And, acquisitions, this would be that kind of time when you really need to be creative and rely on one another. And I think the other thing I would say is saying to the donors out there who want their beloved theaters and arts organizations and maybe homeless youth organizations and whatever it is, if you want those nonprofits to survive, now is the rainy day. Now is the time to really step up. And whether it's donating your time or donating your treasure, nonprofits really need us. And nonprofits are a way that our community can be supported outside of the realm of government. It's more community-based, people helping people, neighbors helping neighbors. And so I really hope that the nonprofit industry here in the state of Arizona is able to come through and the pandemic and be even stronger on the other side.
We are pretty much out of time, but I want to give you just a really short. What would be your message to voters from your district who are watching Meet and Greet right now?
Well, I'm a well-known and a skilled leader here in the West Valley, and I really hope that I have the opportunity to put people over politics here in the state of Arizona and really answer to the people. I'm the person who shows up and always wants to be listening to people, and I think it's time to change the status quo here in Arizona, and I'm the person to do it.
Kathy, thank you so much for being so patient. Please enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll see you around.
I'll see you around. Thank you, Luigi.
And to our viewers and our listeners, we're going to bring in the next batch of candidates here in a very short time, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Meet the Candidates. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the Associate Publisher and Editor of the Arizona Capital Times. With us tonight are candidates from Legislative District 22, Kathleen Oni and Sarah Tyree. Did I pronounce that right, Sarah?
Yes, Sarah
Perfect.
Tyree.
Perfect. Awesome. That's what I want. I think I'm going to start by asking you why you're running. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Let me start with Sarah. Sarah.
It's all right. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Tyree. I am your LD22 State Senate candidate. A little bit about myself. I am an Arizona native. I was born and raised in Maryvale. I am a product of the foster care system. I grew up in a single parent home, surviving abuse and poverty, which led to me living in a group home for a while before I moved into kinship care. I ended up joining the Army at the age of 17. Where I served for 8 years with one deployment to Iraq. My background is in social work. I have a bachelor's in social work, a bachelor's in political science, and then a master's degree in social work as well. I have legislative experience in Utah as well as Tennessee. And the reason that I'm running for office, a couple years ago, I experienced domestic violence at the hands of my partner. And that forced me to end up getting a protective order. I also ended up getting evicted and lost my job because of it. So here I am suffering from PTSD and essentially Stockholm syndrome. And it took the VA here in Phoenix 4 months to schedule me a mental health appointment. And so, I really just thought about how is it that we survive war and we come home and end up committing suicide because we don't have access to the services that we need. And it really took me, some time to think about, well, if me and my privilege and my education and the things that I do have going for me, I'm having this hard of a time getting help, then what is it like for people who have less than I do? And truly, that's why I'm decided to run for office this year.
Thank you, Sarah. And Kathleen, the same question for you, ma'am. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Capital Times, for this opportunity. My name will appear on the ballot as Mary Kathleen O'Neill, but my friends call me Kathleen, so Luigi, now that includes you. I'm a third-generation Arizonan, raised on the southeast border by business owners at a time when our education system worked for everyone. I married my high school sweetie. He and I have 2 adult children and a 3-year-old granddaughter. It's my honor to now have my parents sharing a home with us. I never planned to campaign for office, but watching my fellow educators beg for funding and realizing that my granddaughter will be part of this intentionally defunded Arizona education system set me on a mission to work with my elected officials to find solutions. I quickly learned they are not interested, just like they are not here tonight, in giving the community an opportunity to learn about them and have a seat at the table. My parents and the 4-H leaders that I grew up with taught me to work smart so I can also work hard. I don't know what it's like to campaign outside of COVID because I'm not a politician, I'm an Arizonan. And I'm an educator who's balanced multi-million-dollar budgets. I can address bullying on the playground and strategize with communities about how to keep their kids safe from predators. I'm willing to bring that experience to the Arizona Capitol. And in addition to fixing education funding once and for all, my priorities include cleaning up politics, expanding healthcare coverage, particularly medication costs, supporting our disabled communities, and finally, growing a sustainable economy with high-paying jobs right here in the Northwest Valley.
Thank you, Kathleen. Let me ask you, you mentioned you're an educator. In what capacity? Were you a teacher, for example?
I did a little bit of everything. I have over 20 years of education experience.
What was the last job? What was the last job?
My last job was assistant principal in the Dysart Unified School District. I also administered the Safe Schools Healthy Students grant that brought school resource officers and pandemic preparedness to the schools here.
Thank you. So, in fact, I want to ask a question about the opening of the schools. As you know, in the governor's press conference this afternoon, he had hinted, well, let me back up a bit. So the school opening was delayed to August 17, although the governor in his press conference this afternoon said he would be talking to school leaders and, making a decision. So that tells me that maybe August 17, we may not actually open schools on August 17, depending on what our situation is. If you had school-age kids or nieces, nephews, a family friend whose kid goes to school, would you send your child to school, on August 17? Let me start with Sarah.
Thank you for the question. I do not have children. However, I feel like if I did, I would not send children to school right now. I know that there's a lot of data and statistics that are showing that young people, children specifically, are not contracting COVID at the same rates as our elders are. However, that does not mean that they are not carriers. And we know really already, if you're looking at daycares or you're looking at schools, parents send their kiddos to school because they have to, and then everybody else ends up getting sick. I definitely understand that children need that social interaction, but I think that we need to find a way that's safe for them to do that without putting them back in education, as well as our teachers too.
Thank you, Sarah. And Kathleen, I guess, well, not I guess, same question for you, ma'am. If you had a school-age child, would you send him or her to school?
I don't think that I could, in good conscience, do that. But I do know that we have essential workers and we have single parents who need options for their children. And we do have to address the social and emotional needs of our children. So I am a person of great privilege who could manage to provide for my own children or nieces and nephews myself. But we have to find solutions and we need to do it quickly, which is why we need a clear and concise message that is going to flatten this curve quickly.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Sarah. So a lot of the questions that we've gotten has, as you can imagine, have to deal with the governor's handling of this pandemic. This afternoon, he had extended the moratorium on evictions to October. A couple of days ago, he told the restaurants you can only operate up to 50% of your capacity. Gyms and bars, tubing in the Salt River, those operations have ceased. Sarah, let me ask you, what are your thoughts on how the governor's handled this pandemic so far? And I guess specifically too, if you were in charge, if you had the authority tonight, would you allow the restaurants to open at 50% capacity, or would you completely shut them down?
Thank you. So to answer your first question, I kind of feel like the governor's handling of COVID has been poor. And that's feedback that we've heard from both sides. We started a little bit too late, then we opened too early, and now we have a small set of businesses that have been told that they needed to close, but not all of those businesses, right? And so it's kind of confusing for the community, why is this business allowed to be open, but not this one? And so I think that, as Kathleen said earlier, we need to have very clear and concise messaging on what it is. We need to be able to give transparent answers and not just kind of dance around the questions that are being asked of us. But with that, I also say that my compassion goes out to him because he is responsible for over 7 million people. And this is not something that any of us, could have foreseen. And so honestly, I feel like we need to be able to do something that supports our small businesses, because they are the foundation of our economy here in Arizona. We draw people in from everywhere. And so while we've done the extension on housing, which is, I'm so thankful that they decided to do that, because we could not handle another pandemic where we're having people now homeless, right? But to understand that we need to be able to take care of our small businesses as well. I think that we need to be able to look at the rainy day fund and say, we have businesses that need to be taken care of. And then we also need to enforce our mask wearing. And if people are not going to wear their mask, then they're going to get cited. And that's the money that gets put back into the rainy day fund.
So if you're just to go back to your question, if you were in charge and you had the authority to shutter the restaurants operations completely tonight, would you do it?
Personally, I don't do in seated dining, so I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you, Sarah, and Kathleen. The same question to you, ma'am. How do you think the governor's handled this pandemic so far? And when it comes to restaurants, would you, if you had the authority, if you're in charge, completely shut them down?
Well, in answer to the first half of your question, I've been very consistent about this answer from the beginning. I have been an educational leader in crisis, and I did not like it when other people judged my response. So I will let the voters in history judge these leaders' responses. So I will not judge them for their response. In response to your second question, I think we have been told repeatedly from every level that we as citizens are being told to be responsible. So I will abide by that, and I would not shutter restaurants, But I do believe we need a very consistent and palatable message. I was really grateful yesterday when the National Retail Federation actually came out with a mask policy to all of their retailers. I would like to see the National Restaurant Federation do the same thing. When we go dine out, we've really frequented places where we knew what the expectation was there. And those are the kinds of things that we need to have in place so that everyone entering a location knows exactly what to expect when they get there. And it's a palatable expectation, because, you can't make me is the response that my 3-year-old granddaughter gives right before her daddy puts her in timeout. That is not what kind, caring neighbors do when there is an airborne virus that literally can kill their neighbors.
Let me shift to the Black Lives Matter protest. We had those a couple weeks ago. Many of the protesters, or some of the protesters, believe that we should defund the police. And when they say defund the police, there are two kinds of schools of thought. One says, abolish them, completely wipe out their budget. The other one says, let's try and redirect maybe some of the funding into maybe social services, for example. Let me ask Sarah, do you support the idea of defunding the police in the sense of completely abolishing the police, wiping out their budget?
So I want to make some clarifications, because defunding the police and abolishing the police are two very completely different things. But in light of the recent wave of preventable and overly forceful police retaliation against communities of color, the Black Lives Matter movement has rightfully gained momentum. And as a Black woman in Arizona, my heart hurts. I hurt, because I and my sisters and brothers are experiencing just disproportionate violence from the people who are meant to protect us. And so when law enforcement officials begin their service, they swear by an oath to defend all Americans and to protect their community. And that's an oath that I also took when I joined the military. And so I take that very seriously. And as a veteran leader in LD22, I feel that I will help lead Arizona in the reimagination of what law enforcement looks like, what effective communication looks like with communities of color, really focusing on empathy and providing those communities with the services that they need that may not be law enforcement driven. But I also think that we really need to focus on de-escalation of violence at any and all possible interactions with the community.
So you would not, so just to clarify, you would not completely wipe out the police's budget.
Correct.
You don't support defunding the police in that sense.
Well, you're correct.
Yeah, thank you. Kathleen, the same question to you, ma'am.
Short answer is I do not support defunding the police departments completely. As I said, part of my job overseeing the Safe Schools, Healthy Students grant was actually bringing school resource officers into the Dysart Unified School District. But we have to be very clear about what the function of law enforcement is. And campaigning with Sarah has given me a great opportunity to recognize that I have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I need to do a lot more listening and a lot less talking sometimes, and really pay attention to what the community is asking for. In Arizona, we have one of the highest prison populations, primarily because it's a privatized industry that is sold on the New York Stock Exchange. And so one of my highest missions in seeking this office is to implement a code of conduct at the Arizona State Legislature, and to ensure that every public official signs that code of conduct and that they have no part in the private prison system as we systematically erase it from Arizona. Because yes, we need prisons and jails and we need law enforcement, but our humans are not for sale in Arizona anymore.
And we're pretty much out of time. So I wanna thank you, Sarah and Kathleen, again for spending the evening with us. Enjoy the rest of your night. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you around.
Thank you so much, Luigi.
And to our viewers and our listeners, we're going to bring in the next batch of candidates. So stay tuned. We will be right back. Candidates. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. If you have questions, please click on the link on the YouTube description for this channel and send in your questions that way. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can tonight. We have candidates from Legislative District 23, Eric Corlin, Seth Blattman, and Alexander Kolodin. I guess I'm going to ask you why you're running, and tell us a little bit about yourself. Let me start with Alexander.
So I run a small business in Midtown Phoenix. We have about 4 employees. It's a law firm. Before I was a lawyer, I was a teacher. I taught junior high civics in English. And I originally got into this race because I wanted to present the conservative alternative to red for ed. Of course, now we know that the world went to hell in a handbasket after that. And so I've spent a lot of my campaign focused on economic issues, making sure that Arizona can have a V-shaped recovery and come back from COVID stronger than we went in. I really look forward to speaking about that tonight.
Thanks, Alexander. Eric?
Hey, thanks. I actually spent a quarter of a century in public service as a school teacher here in Scottsdale. And one of the reasons I'm running is exactly why Alexander's running. And that is because I believe education, funded at 48th in the nation, $4 billion behind the average across the states, is just, it's legislative malpractice. When I first started teaching, we were 32nd in the nation in funding, and now we're 49th when I left, 48th. So I think that our kids deserve a voice, and I want to be that voice for them. So give them an opportunity to grow, learn, work, raise a family, and retire here in Arizona.
Thank you, Eric. Seth?
My name is Seth Blattman. I'm running for State Senate LD23. I'm a small business owner. I grew up here. I went to Kiev Elementary and Chaparral. Graduated from ASU. My late 20s, I did my MBA at UCLA, and then I came home. I got a call that said, come home and run the family business. It had fallen on some tough times coming out of the recession, as most small businesses were. So I came home, and we've been very successful since then, hired some good people, and I have a 4-year-old nephew right now who's going to be going to school in a couple of years, and the idea that we're 48th in the nation, is pretty scary. I also want to bring higher quality jobs here to the Valley, and also I want to bring some reform to our government.
Thank you, Seth. Appreciate it. Let's talk about education. Seems like that's the subject that all of you want to talk about the most. So you mentioned the per student funding in the state, and that's pretty low. It would take billions of dollars to get us to somewhere in the middle. And in order to do that, you're going to have to raise taxes, for example, because that revenue is not enough to sustain. If you want to bring the per student funding back to the mid 30s, for example, you're going to need a lot of money to do that. Let me start with Alexander. What do you, there's this whole idea that we're, very down at the bottom, in terms of per student funding. Your thoughts on that one?
Well, first of all, this idea that the problem with the education system is primarily a funding problem is a load of horse hockey. My wife, Shannon, teaches at Basis Scottsdale, which is one of the very finest public schools in the country. It's a charter school, but available at no direct cost to any student. And they receive, I believe, about a third less funding from the state per student than your average public school. So there are many charter schools around the Valley and indeed around the state that are absolutely knocking things out of the park. And if you look at just Arizona's charter system, which again receives less funding per student than a normal district school, and just treat the charter system as a state, you in fact discover that Arizona is third in the nation in terms of the quality of the education we deliver. Not just in terms of the improvement of test scores, for probably why Mr. Curlin's laughing, for wealthy students, but even very, very high performing in terms of improvement for poor minority students. And also we have some excellent district school systems here in the Valley. Scottsdale's public schools are very, very good, right? And so yes, funding is a component of the education picture, but what matters a lot more is how those funds are spent. And a lot of times they're being siphoned off by school boards and their cronies and not making it into the classroom, into the education system, into teacher salaries, like I really think that we all expect. I'm on the board of the Arizona School Choice Trust. I'm very passionate about education issues. And one of the things I know that we need to do is have independent auditors reviewing school districts instead of school districts choosing their own auditors. And that way we can ensure a little bit more accountability and a little bit more of those funds flow into the classroom.
Thank you, Alexander. Let me go to Seth. Same question. It would take to raising taxes by a couple $1 billion to bring us to the mid 30s, if you will, in per student funding. But I guess in relation to what Alexander mentioned, is the problem funding for schools, or is it the problem maybe not a whole lot of innovation among schools? And maybe there are in fact school districts that are doing well. There are charter schools that are doing well.
It's absolutely a funding issue. Listen, Base is an amazing school. Charter schools have their place. I just think they need to be held to the same standards and level of accountability as public schools. But really, I need to turn this over to candidate Curlin because he's a lifelong teacher and he knows this subject in and out.
All right, go ahead, Eric, sir.
Well, I'm going to just do a little fact check on Alexander here. First of all, our charter schools get more state dollars than our traditional public schools. What Alex talks about is the full funding mechanisms that come from the national level, the state.
I hope we didn't lose Eric.
He does freeze once in a while. I've seen that before.
Let me see. Well, hopefully he is able to come back on.
27%.
I'm sorry, Eric. Eric, you froze there for a minute or so. Can you repeat what you said? My apologies, but you froze there, and so we didn't hear the rest of what you said. Oh, all right. He's having internet problems. Seth and Alexander, let's talk about the governor's response to COVID-19. The governor has shutter down the operations of gyms and bars, and you can't go tubing in the Salt River. If you're a restaurant owner, you can only open up to 50% capacity. I'm sorry, Eric, I'll get back to you in a second here.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and so he has extended, for example, the moratorium on evictions to October. Let me start with Seth. What do you think of the way? What are your thoughts on how the governor has handled this pandemic so far?
Sure. So his response has been completely inadequate. It's shocking to think that Arizona is the worst place in the world for COVID right now. I can barely even understand what that means, but somehow Arizona, it's a reflection of the way we've handled the situation. As far as bars and gyms being closed, if that's what scientists and experts believe needs to be done in order to protect our people, we need to do. We need to shut down whatever they think needs to shut down in order to reduce the transmission. At the same time, our government could be helping these people economically if they are shut down. We need to be wearing masks. We need to increase testing. We need contact tracing. There's a million things that we need to be doing better. But the idea that somehow this has become a partisan issue, whether you believe in COVID or don't believe in COVID, or wear a mask or don't wear a mask, is really a terrible thing, because we're really just looking out for public health. And listen, I'm a small business owner. I'm looking out for the economy too. But the best way to help our economy is to slow the transmission of COVID. And that means wearing masks, being safe, taking responsibility for yourself and your neighbors. And that's going to lead to a better economy.
So let me ask you, Seth. In fact, I forgot to ask. What is your family business? I'm sorry. What is the family business?
Sure. Yeah, I should have said it's furniture manufacturing. So we have a factory down by Sky Harbor. We have 2 retail stores, one in Mesa, one in Glendale. The manufacturing's been going 25 years now, and it's a fun business to be in. Challenging at times, but definitely fun.
During the first phase of the actions adopted by the state, in which the governor shut down non-essential businesses, was your business able to continue?
So I consider myself extremely lucky that my business was considered essential.
Okay, got it.
Provide home office furniture to people who need it. So we were considered essential. But I talk to business owners every day that weren't as lucky as me, and they were shut down for a month, 2 months, and no revenue coming in. Federal aid, PPP, and disaster relief loans not being in the pipeline. People waiting for forever, waiting for Shake Shack to get their money. They were next in line, but they were really suffering. And my business has suffered as well. This is not easy on anyone. It's something we're all going to have to endure, but we need leaders that are going to help get us out of this situation. Just
a quick yes or no. If you were in charge, if you had the authority tonight, would you shut down restaurants completely? Right now, they can operate at 50% capacity. There had been some calls from some sectors, calling for a complete shutdown of these businesses considered non-essential. Would you? Yes or no?
Takeout only, expertise, scientists.
All right, so no dine-in, takeout only. Got it. Alexander, same question to you, sir. What do you think of the governor's handling of this pandemic so far? The shutting down of certain businesses, the extending of the moratorium on evictions?
Look, I would say this. If Mr. Blattman just wants to do whatever scientists tell him to do, then why is he, a guy with an MBA, standing for office? He should move aside and his party should nominate a scientist. But in fact, it is not the job of policymakers to merely listen to some scientists and do whatever they tell us to do. The job of policymakers is to listen to all sorts of voices in society. To scientists, yes. Public health experts, yes. But also to business owners, to parents, to students, to every segment within our society, and then come up with the best policy approach that harmonizes all sorts of things, primarily that harmonizes liberty and safety. Now, I am generally a big fan of Governor Ducey, but I am not in accord with the way that he has handled this situation. He has erred far too far on the side of safety. He has shut down people's businesses and taken them without giving just compensation, which he does not have the power to do, and no state legislator has the power to do under our Constitution. But you know what? That's not his fault. Whose fault is it? It is the fault of the legislature that had 10 years to fix this provision regarding the governor's emergency powers. They had 10 years to close this loophole where the governor's emergency power endured until the legislature took them away, and only the governor could call the legislature back into session. They did nothing. They were too distracted with their petty scandals, with their petty problems, and they did not close this loophole, and they did not assume their responsibility to legislate. When I get into office, the very first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to put a time limit on the governor's emergency powers. He will have 1 month, after which they must be reauthorized by the legislature. If they are not reauthorized, they expire. So we will have no choice but to call the legislature back into session so that people can look their constituents in the eyes and answer for taking their businesses away without compensation and listen to the pain that the shutdown has caused. And then, and only then, can we have a discussion about whether to have these draconian measures.
And I guess it goes without saying from your perspective that you are not going to shut down any of these businesses.
No, I will not. I would hope that people voluntarily, wear masks if they're comfortable, if it doesn't restrict their breathing, and voluntarily social distance. But it is not my job as the government to tell them what they can and can't do with their own businesses.
Eric, let me. I'm sorry, we lost you there for.
Yeah, I got to get back to that, Luigi. I'll be real quick.
I'll give you the time to get back to your points here.
Thank you very much. Alex is really wrong. And he's wrong on a few fronts, I have to say. If you want to solve education by his words to Mr. Blattman, then you solve it by hiring a teacher, which is why we're going to say it's time for a teacher. 16% of our kids go to charter schools. 27% of our state education budget goes with them. Those kids that go to charter school get more state dollars, about $1,500 per student. So let's just be straight and upfront about it. You can fact check that later. The other thing about his wife teaching at Basis, I appreciate that. But Basis also only graduates 40% of the kids that they start with. They're basically the Green Berets of education. We can't build an education system around a 40% graduation rate. It's just ridiculous. We need all schools. And Basis serves a niche, right? They are the Green Berets of education. Fine for them. But they also...
Are we going to have a debate over a niche or niche? Which one is it?
I think it would be a niche niche.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, sir. Eric,
Nietzsche, the philosopher. So another thing is they actually highly encourage all their parents to give $1,500 to the teacher fund, and yet they still pay their teachers much less than a public school teacher down the block. So let's just get past all that. He really tried to hurt himself by that machination of putting his hand and patting himself on the back for the job that Arizona's doing. Shall we go to the next question, Luigi?
Let's go to the next question. So,
all right.
Let me be more specific.
I encourage you all to fact check in, by the way. Please do it.
Yes, please do. I will put that in there. Look at the JLBC numbers that money goes to.
Let me ask you.
State funding. Go ahead.
Let me ask the three of you. Do you have a subscription to the Capital Times?
I do.
Seth? No.
I have not invested yet.
Alexander?
Well, see, when I'm looking at the yellow sheet reports, just have somebody send it.
Well, we can't, if we fact check all these things, all these points, and you don't have the subscription, it's kind of a, we're kind of
I'm buying one today.
Okay, perfect. Okay, awesome. All right, so how would you handle, the governor has shuttered some businesses or ceased the operations of some businesses. If you're a restaurant owner, you can only open up to 50% of your capacity. If you're a landlord or a manager of a housing unit, the moratorium on evictions had been extended to October. Let me ask you a more specific question. If you were in charge, if you had authority tonight, will you completely shut down the operations of restaurants?
Me. That's for me, right, Luigi? Eric Curlin?
Yep, that's for you.
No, I wouldn't. I think 50% is fine. I think you do social distancing. The problem really is from the federal government and the lack of leadership there. This isn't a place where we can just put a wall between Arizona and New Mexico. We are one United States, and we ruined it when it became this partisan issue of wearing a mask. For heaven's sakes, when Alexander, who I don't agree with on many things, when he sneezes, I'm going to say, bless you. I'm not saying, hey, go to church. I'm not saying, oh, believe in God. I'm being nice. I'm being a neighbor. I'm saying, I don't want you to lose your life. So I put on a mask, he puts on a mask. If we were all wearing masks, we would be out of this situation right now. So at the federal level, it should be mandated. And since he abdicated his responsibilities and said, every state, do whatever you want, then the governor should be mandating masks throughout this state right now. I don't believe in shutting down restaurants at 50%. I mean, more than 50%. I think they can do the social distancing. I don't think a restaurant can make a living at 50%. I worked for 8 years in a restaurant. It's a difficult business. But with that.
Oh, did Eric freeze again?
Yes.
He did.
So if I can continue.
Well, go ahead. Yeah, Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, abdication is a fantastic word to use. Abdicated from the federal level, abdicated from our governor. This is, I am a small business owner. I speak to small business owners every day. I speak to my constituents every day, and they are asking for guidance from our state government. They're asking for people to be wearing masks, because then we can actually open up our businesses. What's keeping our businesses closed is the fact that we are not being told what to do, and we are not being safe about COVID.
So let me ask you, I'm sorry, Eric, you want to finish your point there, sir? Yeah, because you cut out again. Just real quick, finish your point.
Here's my point. We have to be better treating each other because businesses do depend on us. I wrote an op-ed. We need schools to reopen. Unfortunately, the same people that won't wear their masks are saying the schools must reopen now. They are part of the problem. Wear a mask, we can then reopen the schools. We could probably cover COVID expenses out of pocket for our teachers who will now be on the front lines, because I have a $5,000 deductible with my insurance policy that comes from Scottsdale Unified School District. I could go bankrupt if I was to be in that classroom and catch COVID.
Thank you. So let me ask you, I had another question that I had prepared earlier, but I want to stay uply on this topic. You mentioned statewide mask, or maybe a federal-wide requirement for people to wear a mask. I do want to ask you, at what point does personal responsibility come in? Because you can tell people to do something and they might just not do it. And if you're looking at 7 million Arizonans and you're having to enforce a mask requirement, without the cooperation of the public, it gets very difficult. Let me ask Alexander about that.
What's the question?
Do you believe in masks, Alexander?
Do I believe in masks?
No.
The question is, to what extent is personal responsibility? The answer to this pandemic, and that means taking the responsibility to wear a mask and to socially distance, to wash your hands.
I understand the question.
Go ahead.
Personal responsibility is virtually everything in the response to this pandemic, right? Just because I don't believe that the government, and by the way, I want to preface this with two things. One, we're all talking about, would you, Alex, as a legislator, would you, Eric Curlin, as a legislator, do this, right? We don't have the power to shut down businesses, right? We don't have that power under the Constitution without paying just compensation, right? We can't do it. Maybe the courts will get away with it, but the Constitution doesn't allow it. And neither the Constitution nor good governance allows us to go in and start dictating to individuals what they can and can't do, start treating the economy like a light switch. So people are going to have to address this voluntarily. Now there's things that the government can do to help address things. I mean, we can get rid of barriers that stop individuals from helping address this problem. We can allow temporary licensing for medical professionals to increase the supply. We can provide temporary backpack funding for families so that they have the resources to homeschool if they don't want to put their kid in a dangerous school. Or conversely, right, if they don't think masks are healthy for their child, that they can find a school that also follows that philosophy. We can provide tax credits for employers who keep employees on payroll during extended COVID-related sick leave so that they can stay home. The government can do these things. We can make sure that nursing homes have the resources they need to do routine testing. But what government can't
can you
do
finish
is
your
start
point, Alex?
dictating to people.
Thank you. So let me go to Seth, because we're almost out of time. So to what extent does personal responsibility play a role in resolving or as a solution to this pandemic?
Sure, personal responsibility. I'm personally responsible for obeying all laws and all things that are good for society. It seems like Alex is a libertarian to a degree, and libertarians tend to believe that the first responsibility of government is safety of its people, is protection. So it seems odd that there's no guidance at all. It just I don't understand the argument. And one more thing, I mean, it wouldn't have to be about personal responsibility if we had chosen to handle this issue as a nation and not as a polarized group. Some people decided to make this a partisan issue that never had to be. We could have done this together as a country, as one unit, because it's for the betterment of everyone. But somehow, with some people, it became an issue of a culture war, which is absurd, and it's really to the detriment of all people. People are sick of polarization, and people are ready for people to work together.
Thank you, Seth. And I guess, Eric, you have the last word, sir. Same question.
Yeah, I'm really wondering if Alex supports people just wearing masks. I mean, that's, I think, a simple fix right there. Look, we don't allow people to smoke in restaurants. They have personal rights, right? They can smoke in a restaurant, but no, that affects your health. This isn't like even putting on a seatbelt where it's just protecting me. I think we should make people wear masks. And yes, it's their personal responsibility. And yes, we're going to have some Yahoo with an A15 saying, I got my Second Amendment here. You're not going to get in front of my First Amendment. I'm going to go get a haircut. Well, look, we're not going to get everybody to follow the law, right? People speed. People smoking on their patio outside of the bar. I mean, that's going to happen. We're not a perfect society, but that doesn't mean we don't create laws. I agree with Alex on some points. I don't think we as a legislature have the power to do a lot of the things, but I think we can use the bully pulpit to get people to really come around and kind of care for their neighbor.
And with that, Eric, Seth, and Alexander, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. Enjoy the rest of your night. Try to get your BP down after this conversation, and I guess I'll see you around.
Thank you. I am one subscriber. Fact check that state funding, Alex.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. And
Thank you, Luigi. I'm subscribing.
To our viewers
Thank
and our
you for
listeners,
inviting us, Luigi. We appreciate it.
thank you. We're going to take a very short break. We'll be right back. Candidates. My name is Luigi del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. And with me tonight is Ryan Starzyk, who's running for the State Senate in Legislative District 24. Ryan, why don't we begin by you telling us a little bit about yourself and why you're running?
Luigi, first I want to say thank you so much for having me this evening. I want to thank the Arizona Capital Times, the Arizona Citizens of Clean Elections, and all who are watching tonight. I am running because I do believe in my heart that we all agree it is time for a fresh, progressive vision that brings new age thinking to our elected offices. There are so many issues in our district and state, and I am here to fight and address those very issues. I am a very proud combat veteran, lifetime member of the LGBTQ plus community, in a relationship with my partner for 13 years next month, he's a Colombian immigrant.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's 13 years. He looked at me the other day, he's like, are you kidding? It's been 13 years. Wow, time sort of just flies by. And I'm the vice president of Phoenix Pride, and I've been there for several years doing so many amazing things, from managing tens of thousands of dollars in scholarships and community grants to creating the new annual artist call that brings our young talent to the spotlight. Just that really motivated me to say, there's more I can do for my community. There's more that my community deserves from representation. And I want to give back more because I look at the support that our veterans need. And it seems like there's a lot of elected officials and a lot of perception out there about assumptions that the federal government just takes care of our veterans. Well, it's just not true. We have to do more for them on the state level. And these assumptions are misguided, and I'm advocating for them. And then we look at our schools, our students, educators, parents are all suffering. Even before the pandemic hit, our schools were in serious trouble. And now we're even in more trouble. And I'm advocating for skills-based instruction, not standardized testing, focusing on education of the future. And I think we all agree that we should all be grateful for Superintendent Kathy Hoffman, who is probably the only person in state government right now doing everything she can to protect our children from imminent danger, unlike our governor right now. So I'm running because I really want to bring a voice to the issues that matter to all of us and a new perspective. And I am here to do that, ready to fight for our district.
Thank you, Ryan. You mentioned Kathy Hoffman, and I've asked other candidates this question before. There seems to be two approaches to working with the governor, right? So there's the Kathy Hoffman approach, in which she's working behind the scenes and getting things done. She wanted the schools to have the budget so that whenever they're if or when their enrollment dips, a certain number, that their budget is not hammered too hard. And the governor, if I'm not mistaken, allocated about $200 million or so for that. And so there's that sort of a Kathy Hoffman approach, and there's the sort of the other approach, which is to be more critical of the governor. And I wonder, on that spectrum, where you would put yourself.
Right now, there's a big disconnect between how Governor Ducey is handling this and how Kathy Hoffman knows we should be handling this. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that at all costs, no matter what it is, that first and foremost, the safety of our students takes precedent over everything. The safety of our students is not political. The safety of our students is the most important component of anything we should do right now when it comes to school openings. And Kathy Hoffman is doing a great job of promoting that, making sure it happens. And her approach is the right approach, in my opinion. And the governor needs to follow that lead, because this is not partisan. This is not a partisan issue. She's providing an approach that makes sure that we can have a safe pathway for our students to go back to school. This should not be some political football that we're kicking around. This is our children. This is not political. And so that's my position on that.
A lot of the questions that we've gotten have to do with how the governor is handling this pandemic. As you know, just this afternoon, he extended the moratorium on evictions to October. In addition to that, a couple of days ago, he said, if you're a restaurant owner, you can only open up to 50% of your capacity. If you're going to dine in at a restaurant, you have to wear a mask. Gyms and bars, similar places have been shut down. What are your thoughts on how the governor is handling this pandemic so far? And I guess more specifically, if you had the authority, if you were in charge, would you completely shut down the restaurants 100%?
So there's two parts to that question. First, let's talk about Governor Ducey's lack of handling and still has not handled this current pandemic. He acts like a newborn puppy still figuring out how to walk. And his reckless approach to this entire pandemic has caused severe harm to our residents and our economy. And it's extremely disappointing that current elected officials have not called him out more for his completely reckless approach to this entire pandemic. He's creating more stress by waiting to the last minute to do anything. And we need a plan with benchmarks, not more chaos and uncertainty.
So when you say reckless, can you flesh that out for me? What do you mean exactly reckless? Like cite one or two that he has done in response to this pandemic that you would consider reckless.
Of course. So we close down, then we open back up, then we close down certain things again. That's a pretty prime example of reckless. Like if we just stayed closed for a little bit longer, for probably another month, to shut everything down, we wouldn't be in this current situation that we're in right now. 2,500 families are mourning the loss of a loved one. And that number could be significantly lower if we just all worked together, if he promoted a vision for unity, if he brought us together and said, we just need a little bit more time to make sure we can reopen safely, and so that businesses could open in a way that allows them to thrive without having to have these additional restrictions. I talk to so many small business owners right now, and they're hurting. They're in a lot of hurt right now. And 50% at a restaurant, that's not doing them any good. It really isn't. We need to address the underlying problem here, which is the virus. We have to stop the spread of the virus before we can effectively open anything else up.
Let me ask you about something that's going to be on the ballot this November, which is recreational marijuana. I wonder if you're going to vote yes or no to this ballot measure.
I'm going to vote yes, and I was an early endorser of this particular measure. I support it 100% because the economics make sense for Arizona. We have early estimates that $300 million in annual tax revenue can come into the state, and those tax revenues can be used to help our underfunded education system, can be used to help our veterans, to expand mental health services. These are the things that whenever I see legalizing recreational marijuana, I see opportunity for Arizona's economy to grow and to help the people in the most need right now.
If you were elected to the state legislature and you're facing a budget deficit, hopefully we're not going to face a very big budget deficit, but the state revenue is very uncertain. We just don't know exactly, how this pandemic is going to affect exactly our state revenue. So you go into, if you're elected to the legislature next year, you're facing hundreds of millions of dollars in a budget deficit. And if you had to make a cut, where would you make a cut?
There's plenty of opportunity to make cuts in the corporate welfare, the $18 billion in corporate tax incentives and credits that are given out. There's plenty of areas within that we can cut back down on. There's even a lot of do not release information tax cuts that are provided to companies. And we can certainly find a few $1 billion to cut back on those tax credits and incentives to fill in the gaps. Because right now the tax.
What about program and spending, right? So on the one hand, you would call them a cut. Some folks would probably call them a tax hike. But in terms of actual spending, actual programs by the state, like which program, if you had to make a cut, you have to cut one. Where would it be?
Prisons would definitely be one that we need to cut back on. Just last year alone, the Department of Corrections had over $50 million in overtime. In 1 year, $50 million. There's a great opportunity for us to be able to reduce some of the budget gap that we have. And that's an excellent way for us to be able to save money and redirect it back into the schools that are continuously underfunded by this Republican-controlled legislature.
Let me shift to a subject I think closer to your heart, which is LGBTQ rights. The LGBT community has made strides in terms of gaining rights. There was a Supreme Court decision just a couple weeks ago that said this is now part of what's a protected class under sex, for example. But we're at this point. If you were to survey the landscape, where are you at? Where do you think you're at in terms of LGBTQ rights, and what's next on that front?
So thank you, because that is a very important and very deeply personal issue for me as a member of the community. What we need to focus on is making sure that LGBTQ people have equal adoption rights to heterosexual couples. We also need to make sure that transgender friends, family, and loved ones have the type of medical care that they need and deserve and should be treated equally like anybody else. And we also have to be very, we have to make sure that housing discrimination is stopped for LGBTQ people. There's a lot of areas that we have a lot of work in. And now I commend the Supreme Court for making the right decision, for doing the right thing, for making sure that they were able to define the things that they did to be able to expand rights and protect people. But there's still some areas, some gaps that we do have to fill in when it comes to same-sex adoption, when it comes to transgender healthcare, and definitely when it comes to housing discrimination.
There was a bill, by the way, by Representative Nancy Bartow that said that if you're born male and, well, effectively, if you're a transgender woman, then you cannot participate in women's sports, right, at the high school or collegiate level. One oft-repeated argument in favor of that bill is that there is an advantage that you have if you've gone through puberty as a male, and then therefore. Your muscles may be bigger, your lungs may be bigger, and therefore, if you look at some of these competitions that we've seen, you're going to win in women's sports. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
So Nancy Bartow put that was a horrible bill, and I took a very strong position against it right when it came out. And when we look at gender identity and participation in sports, participating in sports is a good thing for our students. Now we're trying to get to the point where we're trying to micromanage our young people from playing in sports. Students should be allowed to play in sports with the gender identity that they decide to choose to go with. There's a lot of other processes that go along with that. Of course, there's hormones, there's the different stages that go along with it. But no, we should be doing everything we possibly can to encourage our students to participate in team sports.
What do you? I'm sorry. What about the women in the sports who are born women? They're not transgender, and some of them have said this is really unfair because I just can't compete with a transgender woman this way. And when they say that they're looking at potential scholarships that they may lose, and potentially other opportunities they may lose because they're not getting that spot that they believe they otherwise would get. What about that issue of fairness?
We need to create criteria that addresses the fairness to make sure that it is fair across the board for each and every person, that we do have a reasonable level of criteria for each group that incorporates all of the important considerations, such as what you just described.
How would you define those parameters? How would you define those criteria? I wonder if you really dig into the details, like how would you in fact set this one up so that it's fair, or at least to your mind it would be fair?
That is a fantastic question, and not one I've put as much thought into as I wish I did in the past. Now that you brought it up, I'm going to put some thought into it and come up with a more reasonable answer I can send out to my supporters. But I don't have a solid answer at the moment for you.
And I guess we're almost out of time. I do want to give you the opportunity to address not just our viewers, right, but also the voters in your district. Go ahead, sir.
So I want to thank each and every person that's tuning in tonight. We have so many issues that we are dealing with as a district and as a state, and we have got to work together. We have to work together. We will get through this together. Wearing a mask is not a political statement. It's personal responsibility. It's helping to protect each other, and it's showing that you care for one another when we wear a mask. And right now, as we go through this turmoil that we are going through right now, we just have to work together as human beings first. We have to strive towards that unified approach to being Arizonans, Americans, and fight side by side without care for which partisan political ideology we might have, and know that we can work together to get through this pandemic. And the silence from our elected officials cannot continue. We need people that are going to represent our interests. And I am ready to do that. I am ready to call out the people in power to make sure they are doing the things that they should be for the people of our district, for the people of our state, and to help us advance into the 21st century. Arizona is in a very precarious position economically and with the school system. And I want to make sure that each and every single parent knows that their children will go back to school safely. And I will be there 100% screaming at the top of my lungs to make sure that happens to anybody who wants to try and risk our children's lives. So thank you, and I hope I can count on your vote for the August 4th primary. I know ballots have gone out. If you ever have any questions, just reach out to me personally. I will get back to you and set up a call. And I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. So thank you.
Ryan, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. Enjoy the rest of your night. I guess I'm going to see you around.
Yes, of course. I do appreciate it.
And to our viewers and our listeners, I want to thank you again for spending 2 hours tonight. Tomorrow, we are going to have our final Meet the Candidates event. We're going to have candidates from Legislative District 24, 25, 27, 28, and 29. Sorry, I missed 26. And to the Citizens Clean Elections Commission, thank you again for sponsoring this series of meet and greets. And bye for now.